Hi there, and welcome along to this session. It was going to be a LinkedIn Live. We haven't been able to go live, but we're still here and we're recording it. You're not going to be watching live, but you're watching right after the fact, I promise. So it's still happening, Nathan. I'm here with Nathan Sutter, Global Vice President of Engineering at CodaPad. How are you doing today, Nathan?
I am doing really, really well. End of my week for me. I'm super anxious to talk about this because I've been through the ringer as both a candidate and a hiring manager in a variety of capacities over the years. So
Yes.
super anxious to talk about this.
Awesome. Yes, I'm so excited to have you speaking to this because I know you've been through a developer interview or two in your time on both sides of the fence. So that's the topic today. We're focused on the red flags from the interviewer's side, the things that you might be doing as an interviewer, unintentionally scaring away great technical and developer candidates. So that's the topic of today's talk. We're going to go through 5 different red flags that you might not know that you are doing. So, Nathan, the whole thought here is that interviewing is a two-way street, right? What traditionally it's been like seen as maybe a bit of an interrogation from one side to the other, but it's so much more of a two-way street. Candidates are actually evaluating you and your company more and more these days. These developers, highly skilled people, they have options. They're not there begging for a job, and you have to make your interview process a really positive one. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the perspective I look at this from a hiring manager perspective is, even in a poor hiring market, which we're in now, like it's probably constricted a lot over the last, post the COVID hiring boom and all of that. Candidates are at power here, right? There are
Mm.
still way more openings for software engineers and similar roles than there are people, right?
Mm.
So candidates are really at the advantage here, and they have a lot of choices, right? And they have a lot of really great choices. So I always like to put that type of thinking cap on when I'm thinking about how to, attract and retain the best candidates all the way through, sourcing to hiring. And even from taking that aside, it's a little bit of a survival thing from a hiring manager perspective. You want candidates to want to work for you, right? And
Yeah.
the first step in doing that is having a really great process for them and avoiding a lot of these things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, brilliant. Very cool. So just a couple of quick stats to paint the picture of why this is important. According to Career Plug, 53% of job seekers have had at least one negative interview experience in the past year. So over half of job seekers have had a negative interview experience in the past year. I'm not a developer, but I can think of some personally negative interview experiences as well. And 52%, over half again, have even declined a job offer because of it. So that just paints a picture of how important this is. You're giving, in a sense, you're giving them an experience and an insight into the world of working in that company, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what the best possible outcome for a candidate is you giving them a all the way through the interview process, all the way from first touch, all the way to, on-site interview to decision, is giving them a taste for how it would be to work with you as a company,
Mm.
as a team, as a larger group. And like optimizing for that, if you optimize for that, you'll be as successful as you can be. And I think there's lots of things you can do that steer away from like creating an environment that really makes the candidate feel like, hey, I'm trying to evaluate you as a potential teammate, right? And a
Mm.
potential partner in doing business rather than, picking on like, hey, can you solve for example, the latest leak code problem that everybody's obsessed with?
Yeah. And that's something we're going to touch on as one of the red flags. We just need to get into it. It's brilliant. Okay, so number one, let's get right into it, Nathan. Red flag number one is a lack of clear vision and goals. So during an interview, there's this sense that, as I just mentioned, the candidate is keen to understand how their role fits into the whole company vision, what their piece of the puzzle might be as a whole thing. So if you're the interviewer and you're sort of struggling to explain the vision or the purpose or the goals that your company as a whole is trying to drive and what that specific role would contribute, that could be a red flag for the candidate, right? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, really, this is more about setting the table for the candidate, right? Like if the candidate is ever at any point confused about like what is my role going to be here, right? What is my role going to be here? How am I going to fit into this this puzzle that is whatever part of the organization you're going to be joining. It's red flags all day long, right? All the way from if I'm thinking about this as a candidate, right? Like I would be worried that if the interviewing team can't well articulate like how I fit in the organization and how I'm contributing to even the larger company goals, I'd be worried about job security, to be honest with you. Like,
Right.
but that would be my first thought is like, oh, wait, am I gonna, join an organization that, maybe didn't really have a clear mandate for why
Mm,
I need to be here and how I need to contribute to the company goals or the
mm,
organizational goals? That's the first thing candidates go to is like, oh,
mm.
wait, if this isn't clear to them, then is it clear to everybody else at the organization? And am I going to have my knees chopped out from under me as soon as I potentially get hired in?
Yeah.
So,
I
so
guess
that's
part of that
that's what
is,
I would be thinking.
yeah, I guess part of that is you want to, you're joining a company, but you're not just joining for the role you're going to get today. It's about thinking, what's my track? Where's my path? And right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And even just outside of is this job going to exist long term for me in
Yeah.
perpetuity, right? Like, what is like where do I sit in the organization today, or whenever I get hired potentially, and then how do I grow within that organization, right? So I
Mm,
mean, there's not. I can't think of a single candidate I've ever interviewed for any role at an organization, whether it's just entry level IC all the way to a principal engineer who hasn't asked me or been super interested in like, okay, great, I have a clear understanding of this role, which hopefully you've articulated really, really well.
mm,
um, how does this then relate to my career pathing, and how can you speak to that? And
yeah.
that very quickly, hopefully, will become a conversation about growth, right? Both as an organization, and then how that person fits into that, and then obviously, you need to also have good stories about like who is in the organization today that is in a similar place to me that is
Mm,
on a growth path, right? And it's a tactic I use all the time to be clear with candidates and also be I speak to their fears, right? Back to their fears
mm,
of like not having a clear path for growth. And then
mm.
on the other side too, like, I mean, maybe there isn't in the organization a ton of room for growth, right? You just want to be clear there, because if that is the case, and maybe that's okay, right? There are lots of software engineers that I know personally who are like, I want to be senior engineer from now until the end of time. I love that role in the organization. Just being clear about like growth, how that relates to company growth, personal growth, and their own ambitions. I think it's so important. And if you don't
Yeah.
set that table well, like everything else becomes muddled after that.
Totally. But I love that sense that you don't need to fake it if it's not reality. You can also be honest with the fact that, and that might be fine for some people.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the worst possible thing you can do. Like, imagine this as a candidate, right? Like, you
Mm,
maybe have a great interview experience. Maybe the interview team fakes it a little bit. Maybe fudges some of the
yeah.
details, and like you get into the organization, you're 3 months in, and you have broader ambitions, right? And then it's very clear. Oh, wait, this is a terminal position for me at this
Yeah.
organization, right? And so, like, and some hiring teams really fear communicating that stuff, and that's, if anything, that's completely fine, right? Like, being
Mm,
open and honest with expectations will find you a better candidate that's a better fit for the organization long term. So
mm,
anyway, relating this back to red flags for a candidate, like,
yeah.
I just want clear and open and honest discussion about like, what is this role, and how do my ambitions fit into that, whether they be a broader, or like, oh, I'm just happy being an IC here,
Yeah.
for now until the end of time. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So that was red flag number one. Make sure you're giving your candidates a really clear vision of how their role fits into the company overall. Really important. Second one is something you already mentioned in the intro. We're calling it red flag number two, obsessed with algorithms. Okay. And we've mentioned leak code. these algorithm puzzles might test theoretical knowledge, but they often don't reflect the real world job tasks, right? Can you talk to us a little bit more about why that might be a red flag?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and let me start with where I think a lot of this thinking on hiring teams stems from. Like, when you're a entry level developer, right? Like, as a hiring team, really your only signal is, what do they do in college or however they studied up to get to become a software engineer or their
Yeah.
internships or what have you, and how can they solve problems? That's really the only signal that you have, right? And so I think then hiring teams stop thinking about this. Like, okay, how does this progress over time as careers grow? And I'm going to say something that I don't think is too controversial, but maybe to some, like solving leak code type problems. And this isn't about beating up on leak code. This is more like, solve an algorithm out of a book, rebalance a red black tree, like do these things.
Yeah.
That tests memorization, right? It
Mm.
tests memorization. It does not test problem solving.
Mm.
The biggest thing that hiring teams need to keep in mind all the time is memorize. Anybody can memorize anything, right? It's
Mm.
not a good signal for a candidate. And on the candidate side, right, you asking them to solve something that is, I'm going to take a toy example. Say you're asking a senior engineer something that's a very computer sciencey thing. I'm going to beat the red black tree balancing up because it's a problem that's solved all the time
Yeah.
in academia, right? In like computer science year 2 or 3. Those people haven't thought about those types of problems in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And what you're
Mm.
asking them to do is regurgitate something that they've memorized somewhere. That
Mm.
has zero to do with problem solving, right? And so the thinking about this from the number of possible things in software engineering that somebody can memorize is it's not infinite. There's a finite number of these things, but you're testing how much somebody can memorize something. And there
Yeah.
is, I would say, is almost zero value in that.
Yeah.
And so from a hiring team perspective, it's a bad choice because you're not finding the signal that you want. And from a candidate perspective, you are actively telling them, I don't care how you solve problems. Just tell me that you can memorize something, which is
Yeah.
it's a huge red flag.
Right. Okay. Well, fantastic to clear that one up, Nathan. Very good. And I guess so. If we look at the converse side of that, what should we be testing for? Essentially, real world type tasks that they would
Yeah.
that they would uncover or face in their job, right?
Yeah. I mean, the ideal interview experience from and on both sides, on both the candidate side and the interviewing team side, is setting up an environment that is as close to a problem you would solve on the job as possible, right? And so I think of it less of regurgitate something you've memorized, which has very little value, both for candidate and interviewing team, and more like, let me give you a problem that we're facing today. For example, at CoderPad, like maybe we're hiring for an engineer. Let me give you a problem we're facing today with, I don't know, our Firebase databases, right? And walking them through like, oh, here's some interesting problems we've solved in the past. Can you help me debug this? Can you help me work through this? And really making it like as close to a pair programming session you would have with a new engineer on the team as possible, right? And maybe there's a little bit of memorization that comes out of that, like technologies you're always going to have to know at least a little bit of how they work, but it's more about them solving a problem with a team of people or a small group of people that they would be doing on the job anyway. So you're getting that, and that's the best possible signal you can get. And there's a lot I have to say about like spending time on making sure that you have a real world example for them to solve that is as relevant to the business problem that you'll be solving. You're
Mm.
never going to get that perfect. There's an exhaustive amount of things you would have to do to get that perfect, but you want to get it as close to as possible. And that, by definition, is completely far away from like, hey, to beat up the red black thing again, rebalance a red black tree for me here, right? Has not this has very little to do with what most businesses do on the fly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So that was number 2. Don't get too obsessed on algorithms, red black trees, leak code. Do test real world job tasks, right? Okay, number three, red flag number three for developers that you might be doing as a hiring manager is giving evasive answers, Nathan. So what can happen as part of interviews? We already talked about the fact that it's a two-way conversation and should be. Candidates ask questions and they want to assess the company culture and the company fit. And sometimes if a hiring manager isn't seeing it as a two-way conversation, those answers they give can be a little bit evasive. Talk to us about this and why it might be a big red flag for developers.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll tie this all the way back around to thinking from the perspective of, is this job going to exist for me for a certain period of time, right? Like if, and like, look, as a hiring manager, there are things, I mean, there's stuff internally we're working on that we wouldn't talk directly with the candidate about because we don't know if we're going to hire them, and maybe we would need to NDA them. So that's out of the scope of here, right? Like if you can't talk about like an acquisition deal that's coming up or something like this, that's in a different bucket entirely. That's just protecting the company. You know, you have to do that as an employee, right? But if somebody's asking, let's take it back to the career pathing example, right? If somebody's asking, "Hey, I'm a mid-level engineer. Can you give me an example of how you've grown someone else over time and how you've helped as a manager?" Maybe they're talking to their potential manager now. As a manager, how you've grown somebody. If you can't come up with an answer that is as concrete as possible, I do this when I've interviewed, right? Like I automatically think you're hiding something, right? I automatically think you're hiding something or you haven't done it. And that just breaks down trust, right? So anything that you're being evasive about, and again, clearly not in the NDA type category, like it's a huge red flag for candidates, right? Like, and it's part of the. Go ahead.
Sorry, Nathan. What even about salary and work-life balance and things like this? Like, how do you be upfront about that stuff, even if it's not good news for the developer?
Yeah, I mean, let's take the controversial unlimited PTO policies that companies are either doing really well with or abusing right now. So. Questions I've gotten all the time is CoderPad. We have unlimited PTO. We don't have a bank. We don't really track it, right? Like it's I would say very modern, but there are companies that abuse that, right? And say like, well, you have unlimited PTO, but I'm not really ever going to let you take time off, right?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if I were a candidate coming into interview for a position at CoderPad, whether technical or not, and you say you have unlimited PTO, right? Like, give me some examples of what that looks like, right? And so my honest answer would be like, and I think I am a chief harasser of people who don't take vacation, right? Like, all of the literature says that a well-rested team performs much better over time than a team that is, you know, beaten into the ground, work 80 hours a week, and never takes vacation, right? So from a very selfish point of view, I want my team to be well-rested and well done. And I can, you know, I would give examples of like, oh, Jonathan took this many weeks off, and I don't track it, but I need to make sure we have a minimum. And, you know, with our people team here, we have a minimum floor for we expect people to take a minimum amount of vacation, and we don't cap people, right? But if you know, performance dips or something like that, we'll start asking questions because, you know, maybe a sign of checking out. But you want to give really concrete examples of like, hey, how does like, you know, unlimited PTO is something people are very dubious about, right? Because there are companies abusing it. You want to be as clear as possible about what you do positively there, right? Otherwise, it's like, well, okay, you're just gonna, you know, let me take 3 days off a year and abuse me otherwise, right?
Yeah, and almost in that example, if you don't give the example behind the unlimited PTO, it can lead people to think, oh, it's one of those companies that say that, but is it really the reality? Yeah.
100%. Yep. And again, it's back to being as straightforward and non-evasive as possible. Like you want to give anecdotal examples of like, and you know, more concretely, like for software developers, it's a huge worry outside of vacation that, you know, the base expectation is 80 hours a week, right? Like, or 60 hours a week or above that. And so being able to answer, and maybe it's some organizations work really hard and that's the expectation, and just being back to, you know, the other point, just being clear with like what the expectations are. is important. I mean, I would never want my team working that much, but you just want to be clear and be open and honest, and you don't want to surprise the candidate. If they hit the ground running and day two, like, oh man, you guys are working like crazy, and you didn't tell me about that.
Yeah, totally. Brilliant. Okay, so now we're up to number 4, the fourth red flag that you as an interviewer, hiring manager might be unknowingly doing to your developer candidates is using buzzwords and kind of unrealistic requirements. So this might reflect in the job description, but also in the interview. If you're using words like rock star or ninja, it could potentially be a red flag, right, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, when I read requirements like that, and like, I mean, let's be honest, most of the job postings have some nonsense like this in them. It reads to me like either a non-technical person wrote this and they're struggling to put a job description together, which is maybe it's acceptable, but maybe it's not. But or you don't know what you need, right? Like as a hiring team, both of those are like, oh my god, I don't know what you guys are doing. And sometimes, like, look, I've worked with sourcing and hiring teams where they wrote a job description for me based on some very general needs that I needed, and then the candidate gets in and says, hey, what is this weird, like, I don't think I've ever put rock star on a job requirement, but let's just pretend I did. Like, what do you mean by rock star required? I'm like, oh, that's just marketing speak. It doesn't really mean anything. Here are the things I really need, right? So I mean, if at all possible, you just want to be clear about what you expect, right? And don't, like, oh my god, don't use that in a live interview either. Like, just be as clear and transparent and non-buzzwordy as possible. I think everybody's throwing around Gen AI right now. It's like, we need required. I think people should go straight to jail when they use that term, by the way, because it's like one of those. It doesn't really mean anything, but it sounds sexy, and like it's just it's so off-putting, to be honest with you. Yeah. It's off-putting to all candidates.
Totally. So it's even jumping on the latest trend in tech and just dropping it into an interview.
Yeah. It's like it's pulling out your thesaurus and trying to sound as smart and modern as possible. Just it doesn't read well,
Yeah. A lot of this seems to be coming back, Nathan, to setting clear expectations, right? And just being really upfront, even if, I think sometimes we have the sense of we need to paint the most amazing picture of our company, but oftentimes it comes back to being honest about how it really is. And some people will be right for that and some people may not be right for that.
100%. Like, I'll go back to the example of, like, I was a senior engineer at many years ago, and I know people who are at that level in their career and they're still doing that for forever, right? So I think hiring teams are scared of being honest in certain cases because they fear they're going to scare away the best talent, which might be true, right, in certain circumstances. But a worse outcome than that is getting somebody who's really, really skilled and really awesome and just being so misaligned with expectations when they start the job or a couple of months in that, I mean, like they're not going to stick around, right? And just, again, looking at this from a selfish perspective, like, you are costing yourself lots of time, you can put dollar figures on how much it costs in people time to hire someone, let alone salary. You're just going to have to rehire someone for that role. So I think I've had to coach some of my, like, early people managers who I've coached into those roles over time at different organizations. And, like, look, I know you're fearful about, like you said, Joe, like, painting the brightest picture possible of this role, but what you should be fearful about is not being as clear as possible with what we have here and what we have to offer. And I promise you, we will find it. Like, if you're in a good organization, you will find a good fit. But you should be looking 3 to 6 months in the future at that new employee's satisfaction rather than, oh God, am I going to scare away some magical unicorn, right?
Yeah. Brilliant perspective, Nathan. I love that. Okay, we're on to the final red flag, Nathan. The final red flag that you might be doing and scaring away developer candidates is presenting a programming buffet, what we call a programming buffet. So, a diverse skill set is really valuable, but listing an excessive number of different programming languages and tools that this person has to be an expert in can be a real turn off for candidates, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, first of all, it's not realistic, right? I think people start at full stack developer and end with all of the potential permutations of all programming languages ever, right? As a
Yeah.
job requirement. It's just, if you have that on a job rec, it immediately screams either these people don't know what they're looking for, or it's all BS there, right?
Yeah. I've seen some funny sort of memes and things around like, you know, 8 years experience in this language and it was only invented 5 years
Yep.
ago or something. And you're
It's
just
like,
trying to, yeah, you're essentially trying to catch, you're just trying to create a huge net where you can just catch the best possible person or something.
yeah, and I mean it also speaks to it speaks to not being able to accurately describe what you need, right? Like,
Mhm.
I mean, at CoderPad, since we've done some acquisitions over the years, we've got a variety of different programming languages all over the place, right? As you would expect. Any organization, big or small, well, I mean, maybe not a small startup, but medium size and up, you're going to have that, right? So you're going to have a smattering of everything everywhere. It's not going to be one or two tool sets. But that shouldn't be a requirement for a job, right? Like I was actually just having a conversation with a role we're going to be opening here soon about like we've got a lot of on the classic CoderPad interview side of the business. We've got a lot of Ruby, right? And so we've got a huge French team, and one of our it's got a lot of really like expert Ruby developers there. So I had a really good conversation with the engineering site lead there about like how much do we want to index on like going deep on that or going wide on all the potential. So it's
Yeah.
I don't know. It's about setting clear expectations and hiring somebody who can fit best into
Yeah.
your organization as it exists today, but also not like if I put all of the buffet that we have on the job requirements, it's just not realistic, right? It's not
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah.
It really
And
isn't.
a good developer will be able to sniff that out and see that
Yeah.
instantly. The fact that you don't really know what you need.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're just not going to attract the right people. If
Mm.
and you're not going to set a different way. That's a negative view on that. Said a different way, you are not going to find the people that will fit best into your needs if you do it that way.
Yeah.
For sure, there's no
Yeah.
way.
Okay. Well, that was our five big red flags that you, as a hiring manager, as an interviewer, or as a HR person, may be doing in interviews. Nathan, did you have any final thoughts for that audience, just to wrap this up before we close?
I think I'm just going to sort of go back to the clarity. I think my perspectives are design a hiring process that is as close to working with this person day one as you can possibly get. So you get good signal. You do not ask them like puzzle type questions. Don't open cracking the coding interview. Pick a toy question out of that and then copy and paste it as an interview question. It's a horrible experience. It doesn't give you the signal you need.
Yeah.
And then be clear and open and honest. And one thing that we didn't talk about is some candidates are a little bit scared to ask these questions. So you want to draw
Mm.
this out of them. It's like, what are you interested in about career pathing? What are you interested in about our work life balance? What are you interested in as our company direction? So I think leaning in as a hiring team and making a candidate comfortable and open enough to ask these questions so you can
Yeah.
be as clear and level set all of those expectations is I mean, it's something you need to actively think about all the time to
Yeah.
get the best person, best fit for your team, for sure.
Brilliant. Well, brilliant insights. Great way to wrap it up, Nathan. For all of you watching here, it's not a live, but it's a video. So I'd love to see if you have any comments or any questions. Just post them in the comments section just down below, and we'll be sure to reply to them text-basedly since we're not live. But Nathan, it's been such a cool conversation. Thanks for joining me today, and hope you have a great rest of your day on that side of the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Been a pleasure.